Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Thank you all for being here. It feels like it's been way longer than a month since we met on a Saturday. Not sure why, but there's an awful lot of things going on for this group and for our community. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started to be really mindful of our time. Hopefully you noticed in the email that was sent that a request was made by the group that met last Wednesday to discuss the polling results, that this meeting be extended until noon. I realize that might not work for all of you, and we tried really hard to put an awful lot of information into still that 2.5-hour time frame until 11:30, but depending on the level of questions and interactive conversation, which is important and we may truly need to go till noon. I will have to dash out of here. No, actually I will limp out of here. I'm not dashing anywhere right now at noon, but there will be others that, might be able to linger a little bit longer. We changed our agenda for today from what was originally intended because of the fact, as most of you should be aware, with a lot of input from you and also input internally, we moved forward with polling for the potential of a revenue measure either in March 2020 or November 2020. That information from the poll, which is now completed and was shared with a subgroup of this group last week, helps to inform all of you and where you think we should go with this process, and also helps to inform city staff and ultimately helps to inform the city council. So because there was not a complete conclusion at the end of the discussion Wednesday night, and because there were some questions for a bit more information, there was a request to continue that conversation today. So we're going to spend our about first hour with Chris Keone quickly re-reviewing the polling results that were shared on Wednesday night. He has some more information that addresses some of the questions that were asked by the group. We also had some internal discussions in relation to what does it mean to declare a fiscal emergency. And so Chris has information on that. I don't want to steal the thunder on that one, but we really can't just declare a fiscal emergency. But it's always worth looking at these things to consider all the options. From there, we will have our discussion and presentation related to housing and growth and the impacts of the new state housing legislation on Morgan Hill. A lot of information has gone out about that, but it's your opportunity to ask questions and go in deeper. We also, although we're not planning to present it outright, have a lot of information on homelessness. Part of the presentation is about our affordable housing program, but we've tried to tweak it a little bit based on what we've heard from you and what you want to know about and how things impact the bottom line of the general fund. So there's a lot of slides that we're not necessarily going to show you as part of the presentation, but that are backup to help answer questions. So without further ado, because none of our folks that are going to talk about housing and so forth are here yet, so we'll introduce them when they come. They're going to be prepared to present at 10. Chris Keone is going to present to you now. And we kind of do need to come to a conclusion on this group's recommendations to council, right, Chris? Yes. By the end. So by 10 o'clock, we're hoping you guys have a sense of what you would recommend. And if not, then we're going to need another meeting to get there. Okay?
Okay, as we get started, some of the numbers, the group that, I think about half of you were here on the Wednesday that we talked through this. So this is an updated version from Wednesday. So if you don't have one of these, they're on the table over there. I recommend grabbing it because the numbers are kind of small. So it's just going to be useful to have as we walk through. Since many of you already kind of sat through the polling results, I'm going to run through them really quickly, just to keep on schedule. So if people have more questions afterwards, we can go through it. But since half of you or so already kind of went into details on some of this, I'm going to respect your time and keep moving through it. And we're going to really get to some of the questions and thoughts that the group that met on Wednesday really wanted to flush out a little bit more. And then as Maureen said, we have some more time that the group could look at these things, but really want to come to some consensus on where we're going now, or what you guys want to do for the council meeting on the 6th. So just really quickly again, just the type of elections we can do. We have the March election and the November election. At the March election, we really can only do a special tax for a specific purpose, which requires a 2/3 majority vote, where in the November election, you can do a general tax measure, which would be for general city services, and that would require 50% of the vote. And it's the reason, just I know everyone wasn't here on Wednesday, but the reason we did the polling now, because as Maureen explained, it was a little early in the process, is because if there was an interest from the council to do something in March, we have a specific time frame that we have to make decisions on by early December, which we're almost there. So we wanted to give this group, as well as the council, an opportunity to think about the March election. So that was really the reason behind doing the polling. So we polled for two things. One was a sales tax, which would quarter-cent sales tax is all we can do right now. That's all there is left in the cap that we can go to, and that would generate $2.5 million a year for the city's general services. And then we did a community facilities district, which is a property tax, and that would we actually did it in the format where existing residents would pay less than new people moving in or people purchasing houses on that property tax, and then on change of ownership, it would go up to the higher level, and that would generate 1.4 million, 1.5 million to start, and then go up to over 7 million as houses begin to transition annually for city revenues. So I'm not going to read through this, but this is the exact wording of the polls, and it's in your packet. So you can see this is the polling for the community facilities district, and what it would be for, which was focused on public safety and potholes, and the polling results really showed that, and you can kind of, when you look at these, there's a column for March and a column, or it's a couple columns for March and a couple columns on November, and those are the voters that are likely to vote in each of those elections and how it polled for each of those elections, so you can see the difference in polling between the two potential elections. And then there's 3 times that the polling occurs during the survey. The first is uninformed, and then there's an interim, and then there's an informed, and that's after the voters learn more and get asked more questions through the survey. So you kind of look at an average of all those scores to see where you're at. But if you look at the community facilities district to start with the first testing, and we'll just say look at March, because November is not far off from March. The total yes was only at 38% and 52% no for that. Then it goes higher after some of the comments I talked about, up to 49% and 45%, and then ending at 43% and 51%. So even when you average those, our polling experts said there's really no possibility of that property tax passing at the 2/3 level it needs to do, and would not likely even pass in the 50% level. So we the group on the last Wednesday kind of moved and said, keep moving on, this is very interesting, it's going to be a lot of work. So we went to the sales tax, which we talked a bit again about public safety and potholes, and the polling for this polled much better, but as you can see, so 58 to 36 in the uninformed, and then the interim was 65 to 32, so really high there. And then the informed, which is the final one, was 51 to 42. Our consultant who up with the polling says this is, if we went for the March election, which would require typically the 2/3 vote, we are going to have a very difficult time reaching that. In a general election where 50% vote is possible, there's a real good chance of this passing. Of course, with an education campaign on the city's end to explain what it could do, as well as potentially a group or multiple groups supporting it as it goes through. So those were the results from the polling. There were a lot of subsequent questions included in there as well, and the themes that showed the most importance to the residents overall were 911 response times, fixing potholes, and fire prevention and protection services, which are pretty typically what we've heard in other polls before. So this is all stuff we talked about on Wednesday. And then the group on Wednesday said, we want to understand more about some specific areas, and those specific areas the group wanted to understand more we had talked about, can we do a general election in March? And the answer is only if there's a fiscal emergency. So the group said we need to know a lot more about what this fiscal emergency is. So we're going to have some information on that. And then there was discussion from the group on the previous time we went to the ballot box for a utility users tax in 2008. So we have some information on that as well that we're going to share. And then there was some questions on an oversight committee, and those are the things we're going to try and walk through now. And I was thinking you guys can jump in and ask questions anytime, or we can get through the whole thing, and then I can turn it back over to you guys to have the discussion. But just jumping kind of back on track, recommendations, sales tax would be possible for 50% approval on a general tax. CFD not likely to be possible. The group also said, what's the difference between March and November? And it's real hard for us to really give you an exact thing because we don't know what's happening in March and November, but try to summarize a couple of things. The one thing in your packet, you can see the polling for the results between March and November because that's in there. And there's not really a statistical difference when you include the margin of error between March and November from the polling results we have at this point. But we talked about fiscal urgency as one of the reasons between March and November. And then there's competing things going on at the ballot. And there's going to be a lot. The one we know for sure going in March now is, at least we believe is going in March, is the school bond here locally for Morgan Hill Unified. So that's going in March. And then for November, we're hearing all kinds of things, a big multi-county tax, calling it Faster Bay Area, one of the things that's being discussed. The counties talked on and off about different tax measures they'd be doing individually for all sorts of different things. So we don't really know about November of 2020 and what might happen there. But we think it will likely be a crowded ballot box for sure, or ballot for sure. And then the other, March versus November, we always have that chance of an economic downturn the longer we wait. And when that happens, people tend to, when they have less money to spend, they're less likely to vote for additional taxes. And then potential turnout of the different elections. There's always that discussion of what's going to happen, and depending on what's happening in primaries or the general election, that can influence that. So talking about the fiscal emergency and what it would take to do that, Harjo from our team over there helped do a lot of background research on this and what it could mean. And there's several cities that have done this, so it means different things. But most of the time there are formal reasons for cities to do that, which include major infrastructure failure, natural disasters, or low reserves and your inability to pay your financial obligations. So those are the reasons, but before there's legal considerations, you have to do it legally per state law. So before declaring a fiscal emergency, there has to be some evidence. So there's an outline of some of the things that would likely be required for us to declare the fiscal emergency, and we've outlined those. But as city staff, as I mentioned the previous Wednesday, we hadn't had time to really review it. We spent a lot of time reviewing this, and from our professional opinion, we cannot meet the requirements to do that for the March March election, even though we've talked about, some changes with state law. But the city has been, at least in our financial planning, pretty proactive on maintaining our reserve levels and doing those things before we would say, hey, we have to go back to talk to our bargaining groups or MOUs, and we have not laid off staff, we have not drastically cut services yet. Declaring a fiscal emergency would not be something that would be likely to be able to stand up to legal scrutiny for the potential to do a general tax in the March election. So we've kind of talked through that. And you can look at the some of the rationale I've outlined there, and there's several cases across the state. Santa Cruz did it last year. There's a couple of other cities that are planning to do it this year. But even in the case of Santa Cruz, it was pointed out when they went to the off election last year, they did it because there was no general election this close to what they were doing, right? There wasn't a 2020 November election, so there's some differences. So we'd be happy to talk through that more, but we've done a little more research on that. So then jumping to the previous utility users tax in 2008, which was a big question, we were able to pull some data from the polling that we found, and I actually have copies. I didn't make a lot of copies, but we can send them to anyone who's interested of all the kind of staff reports that led up to the city council making decisions in 2008. Doug, do you have those all memorized?
They're on my computer.
So he can share them too. So there was support. So as we talked about the ballot test, I basically just pulled the polling results for the UUT that led to the election the same way we talked about it, from the uninformed to the interim to the informed. And it was right there around the 50% mark, but it wasn't way above the 50% mark on the polling. So it was close. It was in the mix. But there's a lot of interesting things going on at that time, as the mayor can explain a lot of different things that were being looked at. But ultimately, even the polling was right there, where it could go either way or the other, but it wasn't super strong. It actually, the results of the ballot box were much lower than the polling suggested. And there's probably several reasons for that.
My personal opinion was that the biggest reason that the election turned out so bad is we did not have 100% unanimous council support behind the measure. So,
Yeah, and
Chris, please repeat the question.
I think also 2008 was a bad year for the economy, to say the least.
I don't think I didn't respond to that, but yeah, agree.
For March, was that from March?
No, it was for November 2008. Yep. So we do have lots of, if a lot of you historians want to look into the detail, we definitely have all the staff reports that led up to that. It was fun reading through those for sure. So that's the previous UUT, and that can be continued to be reviewed as we go forward from the learning experiences on that. I'll come to you.
One of the other things that is worth mentioning too in relation to this, no one really out in the community took on to create a campaign to really campaign for this measure. So that was another missing element in a successful revenue measure.
So one of the last questions was oversight committees, and I don't have a real answer on how this. I think the question that was brought was, what does the oversight committee look like? And I think it's done quite a bit of different ways. As we've seen, I think representatives from the school district can tell you how they've done it with bond measures, seen how all kinds of cities have done it. So I don't think there's a specific answer. I think that's something, and I've put some points up there, but I think this is something that the group could explore as we move forward. If there's not an urgency or a reality of getting something to the polls or to the ballot box in March, it's something that this group can explore going forward and have that discussion on it, if it makes sense and in what format makes sense. So there's that. And then I'm just reminding the polling results are going to go to the City Council on November 6th. So this group doesn't necessarily have to make a recommendation. We recommend you don't do anything till November or do something in March. But I think it would be important to have the discussion on these polling results and have some representation to the council on November 6th to provide some input from the group on your discussions, whether you have an exact, this is the consensus and recommendation from the group, or this is what we discussed and this is some of the things we're thinking of going forward. We do think it's important that we talk about what you as a group would like to say to the council, and that you potentially coordinate who might do that for the group. So with that, I will stop talking again and we can answer some questions.
Yeah, the group that was here on Wednesday night to hear the polling results was quite small. There wasn't a whole bunch of us here, but there was unanimous agreement among those that we should wait till November, that we needed to, like Maureen says, mount a campaign and really spend time educating the citizens of Morgan Hill on the need and so forth, and that couldn't happen unless we waited till November and risked the economic downturn kind of thing that we had.
I saw the meeting on YouTube, and I know you guys did really good discussing all of this, and I kept thinking to myself, I think in March, if this, goes on the ballot, people are going to be thinking about taxes in March, and just thinking in that respect, November might be better, in my opinion.
So I want to also say that I prefer that we talk about November in large part because I thought this group was formed to become educated and then help educate the community in order to have a successful ballot measure. And so that doesn't happen in March, and so I'm definitely not in favor of that. But I wanted to say a few words about oversight committees because I see so many ballot measures and they all try and assure the people that are going to be paying the bills that this is wonderful and we'll have an oversight committee. And the two that I have experience with, the Water District, the Open Space Authority, they have no authority. They can say, wouldn't it be nice if you did this? And one board member at OSA said, well, we're honorable people and we'll do the right thing. Well, that's really not good enough for me long term. And so what would our oversight committee actually do and have authority? One of the things that I would recommend is what the Water District did. Not only did they put in their ballot a list of projects that they intended to work on, but they actually had measures of progress, what they call key performance indicators. OSA only had their project list, they don't actually have a way to measure it. So that's something that I think helps promote the accountability piece of this. And then because I don't believe that the oversight committee will actually have power, I will be opposed to a ballot measure that has no sunset date, because that's the only power I think we have if it's not going the way we think it should to pull the plug, and that is the sunset date. So those are my thoughts on oversight committees.
Thanks, Doug. And I think, like we talked about, both of those pieces, oversight and sunset dates, also potentially are things that help improve polling or could improve polling. So it's definitely something that can be discussed going forward.
I had a
question about just some of the demographics from the data that was collected. So most young people I know don't have landlines, and it's difficult for me to get a sense of what sort of voters we actually are reaching through text messages and emails. And so I'm not sure that our polls really reflect what people would be voting on. So I think that's something that we should really address in the future. The other thing is, because these elections are so popular, we're going to have a very high turnout. And so that means I think we're going to have a lot of younger voters. And I worry that our campaign to get people to accept sales tax is missing items that would appeal to younger voters. And so I'm in favor of delaying things until November. But I'm also, I guess, thinking if we really want to have an effective campaign, we have to see what issues appeal to the younger voters in Morgan Hill.
Yeah, I guess the other thing we talked about that Wednesday we got together was really a holistic approach that, in fact, to sell something to the public, we have to also have the message that we're getting creative about other revenue generation. We're looking very closely at cost cutting, how we can reduce the need for the budget. Economic development, reasonable kind of assumptions about, the hotels, Trammell Crow, the Shoe Palace. What are those kinds of things adding, and what else is going to come up? And also then the impact of SB 330 and kind of opening up the housing. What's that do to us in terms of possibly more need of fire and police? But I think that was a conclusion we reached to.
I originally was in favor of doing March. I go back and forth on it, but the overriding thing that I'm thinking about now is, I think I mentioned this in another meeting, is that there's been some polls by CFOs across the country as to when the next downturn is going to hit. They did it in March, and it was overwhelmingly saying second or third quarter next year. And then they did it in June, and the numbers went up dramatically. So the CFOs around the U.S. are saying, we're hitting a downturn second, third quarter. If that happens, going in the November primary, probably will not pass. So I know we need time to get out the word to the citizens in Morgan Hill, because they really don't understand what the total costs are and how low revenue-wise we get from other entities compared to other cities in the county. We're the lowest of all cities just about in the county. Getting that word out, especially when they say they want police, they want new fire station, they want, the roads fixed. So I go back and forth because of that reason.
Good morning. Nice to be back on this topic. I was also here for the Wednesday meeting and echo the other comments people made about that. I'm glad to see the update on the fiscal emergency, and I think our recommendation is simply take that off the table. Staff's recommendation is the same, but there's what we're trying to do is prevent all those disaster scenarios. So declaring a disaster could prevent a disaster. That's kind of what power utilities do, I think, not what we ought to be doing. But so that, and just a clarification as far as many know, I'm a trustee with Morgan Hill Unified. So we're talking about a bond issue in March. I would say it's highly likely, but we'll be voting on that sometime in the next few meetings. So it's not a done deal. Now I'm sounding like a politician. It's like, well, it's not done, but it's likely. So, but anyhow, I just want to make sure everybody has that information. And clearly, given the threshold to do anything in March, even though I understand Mr. Sullivan's concerns about the economy, it really doesn't seem feasible to try and do something from the city's point of view for March. So I concur with the let's do something for November, and it should be part of an entire view of how to address these issues, because that quarter-cent sales tax clearly doesn't meet the, there's 7 million of unmet needs. There's a structural deficit, NRDCS going away, so you quickly get up to close to $10 million of needs if you really add up all the things and throw in some inflation. So it's going to take a lot more work. I think this is a good process we're all part of, but let's keep working and work towards November is my sense. Thank you.
This probably is more relevant to the housing discussion, but I'll mention it now. There are a number of moving parts, and in addition to the challenges we already face, there was talk earlier in the year that the governor wanted to start redirecting gas tax money conditional on how you're doing with housing. And at the most recent PTA board meeting under government affairs, they mentioned that MTC is talking about conditioning their grants on how you're doing with housing and transportation. So I think that there are a lot of unknowns, a lot of moving parts, but I think we can't assume that what we're seeing today is the actual situation that we'll be trying to solve in November. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments? Keep moving on. So I think just to kind of wrap us up here, I think there may be two things. I think we understand the kind of consensus of the group on the recommendation of continuing to move towards looking at what we do if we do anything in November, so there's more time to understand the details, to build a more comprehensive approach besides just the revenue measure, and to really continue to educate this group, and then this group to continue to educate the community as a whole. So I think that is a consensus of the group. I would, at least that's what I've heard. No one's shaking their head at me right now. So we'll keep moving forward. So then,
Maybe this is off the question. Is there anyone who does not agree with that?
Move unanimous consent.
so what we might want to do is really quick to see if there's any members of the group who may be able to plan to be present on November 6th to kind of say a few words to the council on this item. If there's anyone interested, we can obviously take that offline as well. But if there's people that would be willing to do that, I think it'd be great.
I think we definitely need a couple representatives for sure, because otherwise there's a disconnect. That's what this group is about. And so someone or a couple of people need to. And I would encourage, even if you're not going to speak that night, as many of you to come as possible. So I saw Rick's hand go up. And Nick and Brian. Okay, so maybe we can connect with the three of you offline about what makes the most sense in terms of a brief presentation to council for November 6th.
Hey, Chris, would you put up the last page so that people that were here on Wednesday could see how the polling, it was the page right after questions.
Oh,
You're going the wrong way.
this one?
No, next page. There, so now you can see how the data was collected and all of those things. Because that was in the initial report.
Yeah, it's in the back page of your packet too. I kept things that wasn't included in the presentation, but I wanted to make sure people got it still. Yeah.
Maybe just a follow-up on that, because Yvonne brought it up. Polling is becoming extremely difficult, and because there are so many different ways to reach people and so many ways that are no longer accessible to a majority, to reach a majority of people. But that's why using a polling firm is best practice, because they are the experts in polling and trying to get a representative demographic and a representative of actual voters versus non-voters. So there isn't a better way to do it at this time. I'm not saying it's perfect, and it is becoming more and more difficult. Even research companies acknowledge that, but that is best practice. It's not like we tried to do it ourselves as uneducated research methodologists.
No, I'm just going to say, although the consensus seems like it's November 2020, but just a friendly reminder to the group about what is on the March 2020 ballot.
Oh, the hotel referendum is on the March 2020 ballot, and I know this group is very aware of that. And
It's pro.
Jim Charles.
I think the reason you brought us here as a group is to share your concerns about the financial health of the city. And to me, it seems like we're your tool to reach deeper and deeper into those little crevices that don't get the news or don't want the news. And if that is the reason we're here, then the reason we're here is, unless there's another way of doing this, is to get another tax passed in November. And if we don't have a tax in November and you don't utilize our services to promote it, then what are we here for?
I think just to answer your question, we're trying to give you the data, the same data would share with the community on our results, maybe a little bit deeper dive on the data. But if ultimately this group doesn't want to recommend moving forward with a tax measure at any time, that's your recommendation. And I think the piece that we're going to get to, that's why we talked through all the details of infrastructure and recreation and getting to housing, and we'll get to police and fire, so you know the details, so you can say, hey, maybe we don't want to go this direction. We've had several members of this group say we do want to go that direction, but if you don't want to go this direction, you can say, these are things we might not want to do anymore as a city as well, and what do we do? But to your point, I think you hit the nail on the head. If the group is in agreement, that's the best thing for the city. That can be something that you can do.
Certainly agree with what Chris said, but also wanted to add on that part of what we're hoping this group will do, irregardless of whether you think a revenue measure is a good thing or a bad thing, is we're going to be starting the budget process here in January, and we want this group to be involved in it and to be gathering input from the community. Part of that budget process will be deciding if moving forward with a revenue measure makes sense. Ultimately, that is the council's decision. We're hoping for your input process into that. A revenue measure is not the only, it's not going to solve the whole problem though, as we look towards the future. And so it may include some type of service cuts, and that's one of the reasons, as Chris said, you guys are becoming very knowledgeable about all the services the city provides and how they're provided and how they're funded. So if we don't have enough funds, what are we not going to do? We need that input from the community. Additionally, we're trying to help the community understand the role of economic development also in this whole equation. So it's not a one-stop answer to solve this going into the future. A revenue measure is certainly something that could be part of it. Even if everybody in the community agreed that was the best thing to do, that's not the whole solution. And so we're hoping that this group will continue with us as we move into the budget process, because this is really a critical budget process as we develop the next 2-year budget.
Just a quick note. Thinking about it, we just put another bullet on the post-it pad up there. What we learned from the last go-around was that full council support, the ballot was in balance, and I just want to make sure that we note that before we go to city council in November, to be sure that we put that as part of our topic, our discussion, as far as recommendations. So we we'll need to be very direct with that. Not that it may or may not require that, but we certainly learned from the last go-around. Without that, it was difficult. So that's just a bullet so we don't forget that. Then I have a concern with is timing and coordination as we move forward, because campaign fatigue can also diminish our results. So if this does move forward, as this group, we're going to think how we scale that out and how we maximize the campaign, because I'm sure we'll be competing with other campaigns as well. So it's just a thought.
Just reflecting on you keep talking about a revenue measure, and there is a revenue measure on the March ballot, and it's the hotels. And it's quite a large percentage. I forget what the forecast is, at 800,000 annually. So I think that's something we can learn if we support that unanimously and take that to the population of the city. It'll give us a model for what we need to do for November too. So I encourage everybody to get involved with the hotel thing.
Just really quick, moving forward, does this group see like maybe a committee being able to give a presentation at the Community Cultural Center to just the public to give some education on that with your support?
Yes.
Yes.
Maureen's nodding her head.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, move on.
Yeah, I think we're just about ready to move on then, unless I hear anything different. And just one, I've said this several times, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. Any type of efforts moving forward towards a revenue measure, the city can offer educational facts. So the city can move forward with an educational campaign, but it has to be very neutral. We cannot have a yes for a tax or a no for a tax. We can only share, here's what this looks like, here's what we project this might bring in terms of revenue, here's how it impacts services and things like that. We cannot advocate. So that's where citizens, residents come in as a critical factor because, and electeds, quite frankly, electeds can advocate.
That was the point I was going to make. Your mayor and city council members can.
Absolutely. They are electeds. They are not city employees. Employees of the city cannot campaign and advocate. So that's a really important thing to help the community understand as well.
So, thinking about Sally's comment and something that I heard at your Wednesday night meeting several weeks ago about podcasts, people are making suggestions about, well, let's have some new ways to reach out to the community. What's happening with those? I sent my little message about, here are a couple of graphics that happen to appeal to me to try and make this more personal to people. So I'm very interested in how are we going to reach people in new ways? Because you are getting suggestions, but I don't see any follow-up.
Thank you very much, Doug. Always appreciate your candor and honesty. The suggestions are not forgotten. Some of the suggestions we're waiting on actually members of this group to take some action and move forward. They don't all require city involvement, some require city support. There have been many things recently that have impacted the time and resources we have. I mentioned this before. We are not doing this process with an outside consulting firm. We are doing it with city staff who have full-time jobs separate from anything they're doing here. This last week, actually, just about every single person in this room has spent a significant amount of time on phone calls and preparing for the public safety power outage that is happening at potentially 6 or 7 o'clock this evening. And I recognize that those things are fairly invisible to members of this group and the community. They do impact us though. We've spent a huge amount of time on things related to Trammell Crow, and I can't even begin to suggest to you how much time has gone on just answering questions, preparing for meetings, researching and pulling together information. And yes, those things do impact us. In a perfect world, we could focus solely on this, and I think we have a lot of things. Once we get done with these educational meetings, which actually next month is the last real educational one, and then the focus is, okay, let's start really talking dollars and cents and how we move forward. It's also taken a lot of time for staff to get prepared for all of these presentations. and it takes multiple people in a room. So I'm not trying to like excuse the fact that some of these things aren't moving forward. It's been the reality of what's going on. When we planned for this, we had no idea that we would be dealing with the Trammell Crow issue. And quite frankly, that's just taken up incredible resources.
So maybe one thing we could do is give a gentle nudge to the few people that volunteered. You know, I think Michelle volunteered for a brochure of some kind. We had a couple of people volunteer for the podcast. So I think maybe nudging those folks into some action.
That does require some city attention either, unless someone has all the podcast equipment that's ready to go.
One thought in relation to those podcasts is they're perfectly timed to start once this whole education process is done, because then all of you is a bit more knowledgeable. We have several people who'd like to be a part of those discussions, and some of those podcasts can actually be about all these topics. And then we have people who know how to, be part of that.
Yeah. Well, I respect your comment, you're right. I mean, we do have to take action, because that's what we're all here to do, engage. At least my thought was to go through this series of educational sessions first. And I did volunteer for the podcast, and I'm happy to engage with that. But my thought would be is to understand each one of these categories, and we can do like 5 on 5 minutes, and 5 questions that we're asking. But we do have to respect the time to learn and discover the comprehensive picture that we're looking at, and then put forth a campaign towards that. So I think we're close. And I think those that have volunteered to do that are staged and ready to go. But we have to finish up our last session. Then we can take a look at a comprehensive messaging program and a brand new program that goes with that would be then overseen by this group.
Well, and I'm wondering when we get going on all of this, whether we should establish Google Docs as a platform for this group to weigh in. Doug, I saw your graphics. They didn't float my boat, but that doesn't mean they weren't a good idea. It's just, that would be a way for us to figure out how we reach the broadest amount of people in our community. But we need to have, excuse me, a platform where we can all go to and not edit someone else's comments, but just comment to them.
And I would say I think we really are just about there. A process like this can be difficult for people who already think they see the end result or whatever. We didn't want anyone in the room to jump to a conclusion about what the answer is until we had an opportunity to go through a full educational process. And so that's what we're doing, and we've almost completed it. Yay, you guys have stuck with it.
Yeah, I'm one of the other people who volunteered to work on the podcast, and I actually sat down at one point and I started thinking, what would I want to say? What would we want to say in our first one? And there were a couple of infrastructural things that came up in that process, so I've also been taking it slow, absorbing information. And a couple of points I just wanted to echo I heard, and I agree with, is number one, we should have some kind of way to organize and share our thoughts as a group and a voice that's independent of the city. The fact that all of our meetings right now are organized by the city is great, because we're all busy. But I think once we start talking to the community, it needs to be clear they're talking to their neighbors, and they're talking to people in the city, not the city organization itself. And so I think that's an important thing for us to start thinking about, how we continue on having these discussions, how we write the scripts for our programs, etc. The other thing I think is really was all the data you're sharing with us. And I'm realizing as we start to develop content for brochures or for podcasts, building a relationship with the city where we can push and pull data requests, things that you can share with us if we want to bolster our opinions or our data that we present to people. Like, what about all the recent measures and how they performed in polling? That would be really useful. So building a relationship on data too would be something that could really bolster what we want to do.
I think if I could just maybe summarize, the hope in all of this is that we're really empowering community members to become involved and really take an active part in determining what the future of Morgan Hill looks like. Because ultimately, this situation, much of it is full empowerment in the community when it comes to voting for things. So that is the process. It takes a while. We've had some impacts as, there's been multiple which you don't necessarily plan for because you don't know what they are. I think we're making good progress, and we will start to see some things happening in a new way probably within the next 2 months. So, are we ready to move on to our housing discussion? Oh, Beth, did you have something you wanted to share?
I just wanted to ask, because it sounds like you have a good idea of the agenda for the new year going forward. And is it 100% dedicated to getting the sales tax passed? Is that on a full agenda, or is there going to be open discussion or group discussion about other avenues to make this all work?
Your second comment. It certainly is not all about just getting a revenue measure passed, because there's no decision right this moment that anybody's going to move forward with a revenue measure. We're still in that exploration phase. As far as I know, this group is still in an exploration phase, and as I previously mentioned, that's not the single sole solution to the problems ahead. And we really want you to be a part of the budget development process, and we want you to be a part of the education process about all of the stuff that we've been sharing and you've been learning about. And if a decision is made to move forward with a ballot measure, we're hopeful that, this group will be a part of that. But that's not at all. And we don't have a firm idea. That's one of the things we need to focus on now with your input as we're drawing to the end of this process of the education. Does that make sense? Okay. Rebecca. Sorry to keep you standing.
Oh, introduce yourself. The whole name is not very familiar, but you're brand new to our team.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Garcia. I'm the housing manager here for the city, joined by Ms. Leslie Little, our assistant city manager of development services. I'm the lucky girl that gets to talk to you about probably one of your favorite or not so favorite topics, housing. My favorite, though. Okay, so today I'm going to give you an overview of Morgan Hill's housing story, the history of residential development growth control system, some legislative changes that are very important to Morgan Hill, SB 330. And then I always get asked, what is affordable housing and who is it actually for? Our housing element, which is pretty much our guiding document and working plan that we work on for a couple of years. Our housing program funding and future fiscal sustainability. So our story. Morgan Hill has done a really phenomenal job of creating housing, especially affordable housing, integrated throughout the community and dispersed in a mixed income style. Most people don't know that Morgan Hill has the most affordable housing per capita than any city that I'm aware of in the county, possibly even in the state. But they have done such a great job for 40 plus years, making sure that it's just blended into the community, and most people don't even realize that that's the case, which is a beautiful thing. It should just be seamlessly a part of your community. So we are primarily 70-30 split, with 70% being single-family residential neighborhoods. We've been referred to as the bedroom community. 30% multifamily rental. Multifamily residential uses include condominiums, apartments, which are dispersed primarily along major arterials like Butterfield, Dunn, Vineyard, Cochrane Road, Watsonville Road, and Monterey Road. We have land uses surrounding Morgan Hill city limits, primarily consist of rural residential areas, agriculture, and of course, open space, which is awesome. Areas east and west of Morgan Hill primarily consist of preserved open space, hillsides, and reservoirs, including Anderson Lake County Park, Coyote Lake to the east, and Ubis Reservoir and Chesbrough Reservoir to the west. As you all know, because you live here, Morgan Hill is beautiful, attractive, safe, a very family-friendly residential neighborhoods consistent with the small town feel that we all love. 70% of our residents in the workforce drive 20 plus miles to work every day. The city has done a really great job over the years when we had redevelopment agency of spending the 20% RDO dollars on affordable projects through most of its redevelopment cycle. And those projects were 100% affordable projects. And again, the city has 1 in 8 units that are deed restricted in ownership. There are about 550 what we call BMR, below market rate ownership units throughout the city. We have 880 mobile homes that are protected by a mobile home ordinance that controls the rent increase, which is good. There are a lot of seniors that typically live in mobile homes and definitely lower income folks. Affordable projects can include a mix of senior, or the ones in town here, include a mix of senior projects, large family projects, transitional age youth projects. TAY is for kids that are aging out of the foster care system, ages 18 to 25 years old. We have projects like that. Of course, mixed income families. We have SROs, which are single room occupancies. And we also create units for formerly homeless and transitional units. Our major nonprofit developer partners include UHC, Eden. Eden took over all of the properties that used to belong to South County Housing. You may be familiar with that. EAH and also First Community Housing. So those are some of the partners that have been here in Morgan Hill for a very long time. Okay, RDCS, Residential Development Control System. This was created in 1977, and it's a voter-approved initiative, first adopted 42 years ago as a result of infrastructure in schools not keeping up with the pace of growth. So the voters decided that they would start to pace how many building permits were issued every single year. Pacing program. It allows this greenfield community to keep up with necessary infrastructure needed to support housing development. This was, again, reauthorized and renamed, called Current Measure S. It's a continuation of the same growth control system by the voters on November 8, 2016, and became effective on March 1st, 2017. There were a lot of benefits to RDCS. As the housing program manager, I'm very grateful that it did such a phenomenal job of producing affordability for so many years. So it was a development competition and awarded allocations or building permits to projects that provided the absolute most benefit and the highest quality design. So that it had everything to do with why Morgan Hill has been shaped so beautifully. It created attractive, safe, and friendly residential neighborhoods consistent with Morgan Hill's unique small town feel, and projects that provided quality, affordable housing needs and met our general plan goals were projects that who rose to the top to be the most attractive and win the competition. The 2016 Measure S established a maximum number of available allotments, so we could not issue more than 215 building permits per year. This was using a formula with population of 58,200 by 2035. And that was established in our 2016 general plan update. The city was fortunate to receive voluntary public benefit contributions through RDCS, in addition to impact fees, which I think you guys have heard a lot about already. There were 3 different types of revenues received from RDCS. This is just kind of a recap of information I think you've received at previous meetings. So we received development charges for direct services, impact fees, and RDCS contributions on the residential projects. I won't go over all of these, but this is just kind of a description of all of the different types of fees that we received: direct services, impact fees, and special contributions. For my program, the housing program, usually units were built by a developer, but in the case that they were not, they provided what I'll call a housing in lieu fee. So of course we're concerned about losing some of these fees. The bad news for us is that RDCS is being suspended for 5 years. I'm sure you probably know why. The state's in a housing crisis. It's in the news all the time. Not only a housing production crisis, but also an affordability crisis. Governor Newsom's 2019 budget message pledged to make housing crisis a priority. I think he's probably done that with all of the legislation that we've seen and continue to see. Unfortunately, SB 330 for us prohibits development caps on the number of discretionary permits for housing and eliminates or suspends, is probably a better term, the city's voter-approved growth management tool for the next 5 years. What is SB 330? It will become effective this coming January, and when enacted, it's intended to essentially accelerate housing construction as much as possible, as fast as possible. It suspends Morgan Hills voter approved growth control 5 years. Under the new legislation, the city cannot manage or pace the number of housing units that get produced at all. And there's some pretty heavy financial consequences if we were to fight it. So SB 330 allows unlimited residential permits and it requires that the planning department expedite projects very quickly. It limits public hearings and community outreach. It also limits any subjective design judgment, so no more subjective design, such as look, feel, character. SB 330 requires only objective design criteria when permitting a development. So Jennifer Carmen is here, our planning director. Her and her team are working really hard on creating objective criteria standards that will be adopted. And when a developer comes forward, they will be able to see very clearly what those are and answer yes or no if they meet that criteria. Whereas in the past, the planning commission, the council had a little bit more control over how projects would be shaped. This really limits that. It also limits any requirement which would limit a development from constructing to maximum density, so they're allowed to be taller and greater density now. It also prohibits us from charging certain development fees, and then there are certain parking requirements that are normally required for projects that will not be for projects that are near bus, train, transit, and corridors. Will SB 330 produce more affordable housing? I'm pretty sure it'll produce more housing, but whether or not it will actually be affordable, unfortunately it doesn't prioritize affordability. With that said, cities do have inclusionary housing policies that require a certain percentage of the project to be affordable. So the more housing there is, the more inclusionary units you'll see, but all in all it is going to be primarily market rate housing. What is affordable housing? I get asked this question all the time, and the first thing I say is it's different for every single person and every family because people have different incomes. But as a general rule of thumb in the industry, we say affordable, your home is affordable if you are paying no more than 30% of your total income towards your housing costs. We all know people pay much more than that nowadays, but that's the general rule of thumb. And the reason that's important is, of course, connected to economic development. The more money you're spending on your rent and your mortgage, the less you're spending on businesses and going to the movies and in your community. Let's see, properties that are made available to lower income families, and of course that less than the market rate value. We typically call them below market rate. When we say BMR, it could refer to an ownership unit, or it could also refer to a rental unit. So again, it could be rental or ownership. Most 100% affordable housing developments are built for families and individuals with incomes of 80% or less than the area median income, but can be housing constructed to meet a mix of incomes up to 120% of the area median income. And nowadays, because housing is so incredibly expensive, we hear people talking about workforce housing, which refers to people who are at 120% of the area median income, but also even people above that at 150% of the area median income. So what is AMI? Essentially, AMI is the household income for the medium or middle household in the region. So every year, State Housing Community Development Department tells every single county what our AMI is. And Leslie is passing out a chart if you want more details on that. It's always based on how many people are in your household. But for example, for a family of 4 in our county, it's $131,400 would be the total household income. Affordable housing rental, one of the things we do when we create 100% affordable rental projects is we record deed restrictions on that property to make sure that it is affordable for a minimum of 55 years. And the reality is it ends up being affordable for much longer than that because the developer comes back and wants to refinance and rehab the project. And our council has always been very supportive of keeping our projects in really good condition. So it says 55 years, but we continue to add onto the clock every time they come back to us. Ownership units are also deed restricted, and our BMR ownership units are restricted for 45 years. Important to point out that because we have such a large ownership portfolio, we have a cost of operating that program, monitoring it, managing it. and that costs us $500,000 a year to administer our 550 units. And we do that by utilizing a company that's actually based here locally in Morgan Hill called House Keys. How is affordable housing created? I mentioned earlier, cities can adopt inclusionary housing policies. Morgan Hill adopted one in the past year, but the reality is they've always had that de facto inclusionary policy through RBCS. So essentially, Morgan Hill's been getting units for 42 years. And so in Morgan Hill, we require that 15% of every development be affordable outside of downtown and then 10% within the downtown. Some cities fund affordable housing through commercial linkage fees, other housing impact fees, corporate funding, and then most or all really 100% affordable rental projects access a state low-income tax credit project. So nonprofit affordable developers have the job, really tough job, of cobbling together a whole bunch of funding sources to create a project. Who lives in affordable housing? So I think one of the most important things I could say to you is what used to be an issue for some people or lower income people, is, as you all know, you have friends and family, is an issue for most people today. It could be, seniors, families, working folks, teachers. Pretty much, I feel like a lot of your community, if you think about just driving through your day, going to work, dropping your child off at daycare, dropping your child off at school, walking into your office and talking to your receptionist, you're constantly interacting with people who benefit from affordable housing. The most important income qualifier, and the only income qualifier that gets them into affordable housing, is income, their income. Families with incomes at 120% or below the area median income are considered eligible for affordable housing. Most new construction is targeted to the lower end of that range, which is 80% AMI and below. And then on top of that, whatever funding sources created that specific project will really dictate the different affordability levels that are required in that project. Okay, our housing element. So cities and counties are required to have a housing element in our general plan. Housing elements are reports that we put together through a lot of community outreach and engagement, and they are updated more frequently than general plans. They are also essentially what I use to make sure that we are on target in meeting the community's goals, housing goals related to all different income types and housing types. So it's a housing element is a document within the general plan that we have to get approved by the state. Okay, RHNA numbers. These are important. Local governments are assigned their fair share of statewide needs throughout a regional, we call it regional housing needs allocation. Thank you. RHNA for short. I swear it's this building. Leslie coughs all the time too. So RHNA numbers. So every city is essentially assigned a number where association, Bay Area governments, different agency, but they basically say, okay, Morgan Hill, here's the number of units we think you need to produce in the next 8-year housing cycle based on population and all of the magical math stuff that they do. So those are our RHNA numbers. They are important because it's essentially the amount of units we're supposed to produce and at a very minimum at least plan for over an 8-year housing cycle. Morgan Hill's done a really good job and always meets the total gross numbers. Every city struggles to meet the very low income and the extremely low income. So right now, our housing cycle our 8-year housing cycle will end December of 2022. So we continue to count every building permit that's issued until December of 2022. Thank you for the water, that's helpful. Why we have the RHNA numbers? So the theory is that every city should produce their fair share of housing, and not just housing, but housing at all different income levels. Failure to comply with the housing element can impact the jurisdiction's ability to receive state funds and grant dollars, possibly transportation dollars. Housing is just becoming more and more tied to different funding sources, as some of you mentioned here earlier. New housing legislation penalizes cities for failure to produce. Unfortunately, there's not very much funding or any that comes with all these lofty goals, but creating a sustainable community with housing at all affordability levels is intrinsic to a jurisdiction's long-term vitality and health. Varying employment income opportunities make sense when you're going to have varying degrees of housing opportunities. I'm sure Edith can attest to the fact that you can't have businesses unless you have a place for their people to sleep at night. And if you don't, they end up relocating, which is not a good thing either. The challenges we faced: smaller cities have limited financial and staffing resources. We're a pretty small team. We do not receive dollars direct from the state or federal programs. Unfortunately, the state dissolution of redevelopment agencies in 2012 was a loss of $4 million annually to attempt to meet these goals. And then, of course, just the market conditions, high land and development costs, high construction costs are always a challenge. The continued widening gap, wages versus housing costs. Average Silicon Valley home, you all know this, is about $1 million. The average sales price of a home in Morgan Hill is $910,700. Morgan Hill's housing performance: the city has currently met 204% of its overall RHNA goals, so they've done a very, very good job. However, we remain challenged to meet our very low income category, but it's pretty good. I mean, we literally only have 115 very low income units to produce in order to meet every single income category. We're hopeful that we will meet it. We're trying. Our current housing program requires affordable housing in all subdivisions. To date, 69 subdivisions since the passage of the first Measure S contain affordable units. 15% inclusionary, we have it, and currently there are 548 additional units, mostly market rate, in the entitlement pipeline right now with pending construction plans and permits. What is the purpose of the housing program? To build new housing to meet the full range of future community housing needs, including affordability and accessibility, and to preserve and rehabilitate existing housing in the community. We didn't go really into the homeless conversation today, but homelessness is also a big part of what the housing program works on, whether it's a Safe Park program. We also do rehab of mobile homes for seniors through grants. So there are some other activities that we do to try to serve every single type of population within our community. Build housing for groups with special needs, ensure arrangeable housing types for age groups, served by transit, recreational amenities, health, personal services that allow our residents to age in place. This becomes more and more important as the senior population is increasing. Preservation of affordability has been a long-standing value, so with our below market rate ownership units, a family can buy one today, but then if they decide to sell it next year, they can certainly do that, and we help them find the next income qualified buyer. So we preserve those units for as long as possible. And we start that 45-year clock all over again to continue to extend affordability. The housing program is currently not funded by the general fund at all. Since its inception, it has primarily operated from the Housing in Lieu Fee Fund, which we call Fund 236. Housing in Lieu Fee Fund is just when a developer pays the fee in lieu of building the unit. Council has always liked to see the units built, and that's usually what occurs, but sometimes it makes sense to accept the fee for various reasons. One of which is it allows us to go and maybe take $1 million instead of a couple units, especially in an era today where we only have 115 very low income rental units to produce. So if we accept $1 million, instead of seeing the 3 ownership units, it allows us to go partner with the county destination home and other folks who have different funding sources to create maybe 30 or 40 rental, very low income units. So we make those trade-offs depending on how we're doing in each category. And the other only second revenue source that we have is the Housing Successor Agency Fund, Fund 255. And this is loans that we've given out to nonprofit affordable developers over the years that pay them back in residual receipts over time. So Fund 236 and Fund 255. That's all we got, no general fund. Future fiscal sustainability. Well, with RDCS suspended, allowed affordable house, RDCS, one of the other great things about it was in the recent years, it allowed affordable projects to come to the front of the line. While they still had to be very high quality and meet a score of 160 through the competition, they didn't have to wait 2 years in advance to build. So there was an advantage to the affordable nonprofit developers. Unfortunately, with SB 330, that advantage goes away, and now they're equal with the market rate developer. So one of our concerns with that is we have so much pressure to meet all these different affordability goals. Now there's an advantage being taken away from us, and we're concerned about how much land will get consumed quickly, possibly, by a market rate developer who clearly has more financial resources than the affordable nonprofit developers. So that's one of our worries. In conclusion, the core challenges for affordable housing are land, super expensive, but even if we had a great site and even if we had the funding to buy it, we can't force people to sell. I don't believe there's any eminent domain rule that allows us to say, that's a perfect site, let's take it. So our hands are tied sometimes. Money, of course, is a concern. It costs about $600,000 to $800,000 to build construction of just one affordable apartment. Of course, we do not do it by ourselves. The last project that we built, I think the city's housing fund contributed $700,000, and the rest of the millions of dollars came from county, Measure A, Destination Home, Housing Trust, Housing Authority. So we put in a little, and then we do our best to go to all of our partners up north who are responsible for serving the entire county and partner with them. And then capacity and resources. This is always a challenge. As you all know, we're a pretty small team. How do we move forward and what can we expect? I think I will pause there and start to take questions that Jennifer and Leslie may help you with.
So I have two questions. One, when do we get our new RENA numbers?
We'll start to see what our new RENA cycle numbers look like sometime next summer in preparation for our next housing element cycle. So
They want a microphone for the video.
I figured you guys would want to dig into these details, and we have like 85 other slides in the event you really want to take a dive. But I think the issue is that, as Rebecca mentioned, and by the way, she did a great job. She did a fabulous job.
Thanks.
Trying to put all this together. This presentation is hard. So we have a housing element cycle. New RENA numbers will arrive as a part of the new housing element cycle. So we have an 8-year housing cycle. We just reported year 4 in December of last year. So we're just finishing year 5. As we get ready for our new housing element, which by the way will be a community effort, we'll start to get new numbers from state HCD, and they'll come through, as Rebecca mentioned, ABAG, which is the Association of Bay Area Governments. So there actually is a formulation or a, what do they call it? Methodology committee of hundreds that's been created to start to talk about the methodology related to distributing those numbers. And that's already begun now. But sometime next summer, we think that we'll start to get preliminary numbers. By December of 2022, we'll have to have a completed housing element ready to submit through the state. So with our new housing cycle that'll start in January of 23, we'll need to have a new housing element, and it'll all have to be certified by the state. And they have to say it's okie-dokie.
And I had a second question. What occurs when somebody, let's say a family of 4, and they meet the requirements for, let's say, extremely low? They move in, they have it for 2 years, and all of a sudden, because the one family member was only working, now the other family member is working, and they are going up way above anything. Do they get to stay in that house, or they have to move, or what happens?
Right, so that is one of the challenges with rental housing, is that as your income increases and you're no longer eligible, with a grace period, you will have to move on into something that is not income restricted and make that space available for the next needy family. That's not the case in ownership. Once you qualify in ownership, you can stay. So if you start to make $500,000 a year and you qualify at very low income, although we don't actually produce very low income ownership units here, we start at the high end of low and above. But you can stay in that house forever. So if you make a lot of money, you really anchored yourself, you had an opportunity to save, you had a fixed payment. So it's really how you set yourself up in your life. Did you want to add anything to that? I think the other thing that I wanted to mention about when did we start getting our RENA numbers, there are some regions of the states that have started to get the RENA numbers. And it's probably telling to suggest that, let's see, Sacramento County got a 45% increase in their RENA numbers. Los Angeles County got a 300% increase in their number. So I actually have...
So we have currently a 928 unit goal over 8 years.
I have a slide of our affordable housing production and our numbers this year, and I can pass these out to you guys if you're interested in the data. But yeah, we
Fair to
have,
say it's going to go up.
so we are given those numbers. So we were given a fair share of 928. 66% of all of our fair share numbers are at an affordability level. So the numbers we're getting from the state are only really the affordability. So as we go forward in the landscape, let's say we get 3 times and we have 3,000, 66% of those are going to be required, most likely to be at an affordability level. What's different about what's happening today than has happened in the last like 12 years is that in prior RENA cycles or prior housing cycles, we were given fair share numbers, but we always could meet our gross numbers, and we weren't held accountable at those individual affordability levels. And 2 years ago, with the Housing Accountability Act, the state changed that game for locals and said, now we want you to be accountable at all those levels. Because Morgan Hill has more than met all of its RENA numbers, its gross numbers. It just can't get those last at the very, very low income.
But nobody can.
Nobody's producing
So
it.
how do they enforce it when nobody can meet it?
So what's really interesting is you start to see, you know, a little bit of kind of enforcement quandary as communities start to get into this. But you see the state starting to, like somebody mentioned earlier, explore, well, we need to get harder on cities and try to force them to figure out how to meet those numbers, because they're the ones who can do it. The state can't do it, they think, and they think we can. And so they're going to gradually, by policy, do things like say, you can't apply for these grants if you haven't made this kind of effort in housing. You can't do this, you can't do that. And we'll be rewarded, supposedly, which small cities, that's really not something we see. Big cities are getting rewarded, but not small cities. And then we'll see what they do with the big stick after that in terms of what becomes punitive. Did you have something?
Yeah. They're also starting to withhold taxes, gas taxes. Is also one if you're not a performer as far as having a certified housing element. And as Leslie said, I've been part of 4 separate housing elements so far in my career. And it used to be, when I first started, you have to demonstrate capacity. And you have to demonstrate that you have the land that housing can be built on. And it's evolved over time, and as Leslie said, it's now you have to produce the units. This next housing element is going to be a huge community effort because they've tightened the rules on even creating the housing element and deciding where the housing is going to go and what income level would be appropriate for that particular parcel. And so we're going to have everyone involved in that decision.
I can take this step more. So you don't have to turn your backs this way.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
What's the impact on our existing zoning?
Well, that's huge.
Change a lot to our case.
That's a still huge issue, and it's not necessarily a RENA issue. It is what's going to happen in our general plan. So as we get ready to plan for our next general plan, we've already been told that if we, well, let me give you a little background first. In your housing element, you're required to show how you can meet your RENA numbers. And you have to specifically talk about, here's empty land, here's the density, and sure, we can meet our numbers. We have capacity to do that. So the process now as we go forward is, in our new housing element, if we haven't developed those sites and we want to resubmit them, we have to upzone them. And for us right now, they've said the minimum level of acceptability is 20 units an acre. And we hardly have any land in the city that has 20 units an acre. Any of it. You look at a townhome project any place around, they're not 20 units an acre, maybe 16, but they're not 20 units an acre. So we're going to have a new minimum threshold of 20, and because we're in an urbanized area, we hope we don't hit the new 30 units per acre threshold. So we'll have to wait and see what the methodology says. But when we get ready to do our housing element, we're going to have this activity in the next couple of years in the community that is going to be, first of all, we got all these new numbers. We now have these requirements that we have to upzone. Community, we have to have more density where they won't have it. But I think probably, I mean, if you just talk to us as people who work in this profession, you go, estate lots are not happening anymore. Single-family lots, the real mission, as you listen to legislators, is like, it's a thing of the past. Single-family zoning, thing of the past. Places like the city of Minneapolis have already done away with all their single-family zoning. Effectively, we have done a lot of that with the new ADU units. You can have 2 in your backyard, and you can have another one in your house, and you can take down the garage and put in a unit, not replace the parking. Basically, does away with single-family, single-lot zoning that we're accustomed to. So they'll be big changes.
Question on RENA sub-areas and then a comment on development services. The question about RENA is earlier this year, Cities Association was having discussions on trying to get the cities in the county considered as a unit. Sub-region. I don't know what happened with that, I'd be curious. My comment about development services is I've seen your presentation, both to the Planning Commission and to the City Council. Other than the fact it's depressing, it's a great presentation. But what is not mentioned in any of the slides or in the newspaper as the city's running is the impact on how you're going to develop or deliver actual services, because you've been very clear about, well, we'll probably have to be, to meet all our calendar and schedule requirements, we'll have to have appointments, we might have days where we completely close off the public, no more the friendly walk up to the counter.
Customer service.
And, you know, I think it's really good that you're mentioning that, and it ties into my desire to keep telling people, here is how your individual lives are going to be affected by these changes and the lack of money and whatever. So I appreciate you mentioned that, but I really think that that's a message that needs to be getting out too. It's not just bureaucracy, it's actually how we interact with our city.
Right, and thank you for saying that. So right now we're just kind of, we think or suppose, and in fact some of those ideas of taking things by appointment, we've shared with the council, like, we're thinking about this, what do you guys think, because we work for you, you know? Like, how are we going to do this? The other thing is that we assume, based on inquiries we're getting, that we're going to have this avalanche coming through. And I think we have to kind of like wait and see as well what we're going to do and what we're going to see. Certainly the ability to help somebody at a counter, and sometimes we can sit at a counter with somebody who's confused about a project that they're working on. It could be just a small home project. We can sit there for hours. We can't do that. The new law requires this expedited permitting. And I mean, it is, you got 30 days to do this, and if you don't do it in 30 days, it's deemed approved. And after your environmental work is done, because they didn't suspend or streamline CEQA, of course. That's a planner thing. But they say, you guys get real streamlined, but CEQA, no, you're not going to streamline CEQA.
Does everybody know what CEQA is?
It's the California Environmental Quality Act.
And what's it going to do in 60 days?
Well, so CEQA was not in 60 days.
Okay.
So we have this requirement that we deem all applications complete within the first 30 days, and after that, we can't ask for anything new. No new material, and we have to lock fees. So in 30 days, we have to be really careful about making sure we have everything we need to appropriately review a project. The only ads you can have are those things that come as a result of a CEQA, an environmental review, okay? And that comes afterwards. But that means when an application comes into us now, instead of taking the pieces and saying, oh, local home builder, you're just missing this piece, why don't you bring it into me later? We're gonna go, sorry, you gotta take this back. When it's all finished and it's all complete, then you can bring it in. That's not the customer service model that we have here at all. Yeah, so it's gonna feel rude for us, but that's what we're gonna do. So we need appointments, we think, because we have to have time to go through absolutely everything before we take it in. Yeah. And then afterwards, depending upon the level of sophistication of the project as deemed by the CEQA review, whether it needed an EIR, a negative DAC, or it was exempt, you have either 60 days, 80 days, 120 days, and the whole project is done.
So it's important to note that this is just for housing. If you want to start a business, if you are looking at any kind of commercial or industrial development, there is no appointment. We will talk to you at the counter. You know, even limited housing, I mean, questions, we will still answer questions. This is for the submission of housing applications that this model is changing. And we currently work with developers, like Leslie said, who we handhold them. And, oh, you only have part of your application, bring the rest in when you're ready. We won't be able to do that anymore under state law. There already is something in state law called the Permanent Streamlining Act that sets limits on how long cities can sit on an application, how long they have to respond to an application. And that just makes it so a city can't put an application sort of on a shelf and leave it alone for a year and a half. We do have to get back to somebody. SB 330 takes those timelines and crunches them down even more. And so that gets to the 60, 90, or 180 days.
The other thing that we do is we have a certain assumption built into our existing RDCS fee schedule that there'll be maybe 2 or 3 meetings on average where we sit down with applicants, maybe their engineers, their architects, and we talk through their projects together. And that's kind of built into the fee schedule. So we don't charge them for that piece. So those days are going to probably be over. We're going to end up with, you want to come in and see us, you want to have these people in the room, we're going to have to bill you for that because we don't have any way to recover through RDCS those fees. So now we have to have a direct cost alignment. Remember how the fees are collected. We'll have to have a direct fee alignment. So we're working on those things. And we had a developer said, can you send us the draft of the criteria, the checklist? We said, sure, we get it done, maybe December. But I mean, we're really working hard to try to figure it out.
Well, every time I stop at City Hall, I better bring some coffee and add those for y'all.
Well, we're sharing, this is the cold we've all been sharing. We are such a close group. Thank you. Would you like that cold next? Yeah.
On a more serious note, is there somewhere we can easily, I've been trying to find, like within our county, all the various jurisdictions' region numbers so I can compare it to their employment numbers? Because it feels to me like, you know, I'll pick on my friends and say Sunnyvale and Santa Clara, that they've built office buildings at an amazing clip and very little housing. Yet the ABAG RENA thing is this mysterious algorithm that spits out 1,000 for Morgan Hill and 2 for Atherton. So, regionally, I really question the fairness of the whole thing, and
or Beverly Hills got like 4 last year.
Yeah, and the last time build with ADU. So, you know, as a community, we try really hard to obey the rules, but it sure feels like a whole lot of our neighbors maybe don't do that and are really good at bending the rules in their favor. So am I off base? Or?
No. You know, in the past, when regions got their numbers, cities would sit down and they'd talk about realistically where they're going to get those numbers. A lot of cities knew what projects were coming in the back of their mind, and so maybe these numbers got distributed a little differently. Morgan Hill's last cycle, we had more than 928 or 23 assigned to us, but the cities decided that it made more sense to distribute more housing numbers along some of the corridors like El Camino, where they expected more density to happen, than down here, where we have really no transportation. So those things have gone on in the past. They aren't going to go on this year because we aren't going to form a sub-region because the state rules are now saying that there's really no reason to form a sub-region anymore. We've taken away all of your ability to trade, to try to negotiate between yourselves how to, meet your numbers as a county.
And one of the interesting things that will happen with this cycle is every city and municipality can appeal another city's RENA. HCD also has the ability to say, no, I don't think those numbers are right, we need to rethink them.
Yes. State Housing Community Development Department. And they've spent a lot of time this year as a result of laws last year that were approved that started this accountability at all the affordability levels. They've started bringing on an auditing and enforcement team. So they've now hired 10 or 12 more people that will come forward and they'll audit us more frequently.
So Morgan Hill is represented on the ABAC Methodology Committee on an alternate for Santa Clara County. And so we'll be working really closely with our representative to make sure that it's fair across the county.
Along with Los Gatos, Morgan Hill, and San Jose, we also were the member cities that tried to put the sub-region together. We've been working on that for 2.5 years, so we've been active.
Is there any possibility or any action going on legislatively for bringing an RDA back just to support affordable housing?
So the closest we got to it was Senator Bill's SB 5 that was vetoed by the governor because it was too expensive in this session, and people were very excited about that because it started to put all the other tax amenity partners back into the queue, saying this is everybody's issue. It shouldn't just be localities trying to figure out how to finance it. I see that there's so much opposition from counties and school districts that it's going to be a really big uphill issue. Plus, just technically, when we suspended the old RDA, so if you pulled a title report on a house downtown, for example, where we had an RDA, you'll still see the boundaries are still there because we're still paying off old debt. If you create a new RDA, you really couldn't layer that RDA over another area with that old debt unless somebody subordinated it. So I personally think it's a pretty complicated thing to now reinstall unless somebody got involved with bondholders and federal requirements and whatnot and restructured how the whole financing mechanism worked.
Leslie, you had a question over there.
I'm sorry. I did see you and I kept going, but I was trying to be systematic.
Sorry, this, I have a little preamble, but it will be 20 seconds. So RDCS seemed initially, and this is about RDCS in 330, to basically scale infrastructure as growth happened. And it seems like a lot of this is focused on the battleground of getting a permit in the first place, and like one-time development fees, and then you're good to go.
Right.
You can build whatever you want. Great. Has there ever been any thought about how you, suppose we can't control housing anymore, it's just going to happen, permitting.
And most cities are like that.
Right. Is there any way on the back end to say, okay, it's not the builder per se, but on a per unit, per dwelling, or per householder basis, in order to provide the service levels we have today, there's going to be some kind of levy, there's going to be some kind of additional service fee that comes along with it, such that fires in schools and roads and everything scales.
So that's essentially what our impact fees have done. But here's the problem with individual units. They link into a system and you can't build, you got to build the whole system. So you have to gather enough to be able to build the link. What we don't have is this catchment of dollars to build all of the infrastructure for all of those that are coming online. So it's a timing issue. That's why for us it's worked so well that we can know what kind of gradual pace is going to come rather than have to deal with it all at once. And I think more in things like police and fire, there's a point where you get to, you just got to have another shift or another crew of police officers, and it may, like for the fire stations you talked about, a new fire station means you got to have a shift that's 3 shifts of people, 24 hours a day. So it's not just an additional fire station and you've not got to the point where you have to have your additional fire station. It's, how many people on a shift? 4, 6? I mean, that's a lot of overhead every year, and that's income that you have to show as an income stream every single year to support that.
Maybe one thing I could add on to that, though, is there are things like fire districts that pay specifically for the fire services. We don't have anything like that in Morgan Hills. Other communities do, and that is a way, it's not exactly how you described it, but that is a way that people are basically taxed for a certain type of service. You could have the same for police or public safety services in general. Those are things that have to be approved through by the voters.
And that's why you also see, so for example, I live off of your Burgoyne near Evergreen Heights, Evergreen College in South San Jose. I have 2 CFDs, community facility districts, and a municipal service district. My neighbors don't have anything, so they have all those services from their general taxes, but our units have all of those, and that's kind of the new paradigm that we're seeing. Yeah.
Just to add on to that, to your question, so that was one of the things that we pulled, the CFD that we were looking at, so that the intent was exactly that, what you were referring to.
Yeah. You know, and I think there are other things that everybody should be aware of, because I think at some point in time it's going to be, what are we doing for the greater good of our community? We all understand this is certainly a crisis, but then we have to figure out how we get there, because not everything's equal. Governor Newsom, in his signing session with SB 330 said, the tragedy here is that the way that municipalities are financed is really archaic. And they've never been incentivized to build housing because it's expensive to serve those houses. So those communities that have had market and all sorts of other opportunity have said, sure, I'm going to take in all those other uses, those commercial and office and those industrial uses who pay a whole lot more than what they require, and I'm going to build those. So those of us who didn't have a market that thought of us that way, it's like, well, wait, so now we're going to throw all those houses in here, and we don't have that offset. And so you're more disadvantaged than those that are now going to be required to also build their housing. So, you know, it's a struggle, and the state's known that this has been awkward and not fair for a long time, but there's not been a general fix to it. So here we are locally trying to fix that. You know, I think that Morgan Hill has been very above board. We spent a lot of time legislatively trying to get an amendment to SB 330. We did get it accepted by the author, Senator Skinner. Robert Rivas' office worked with us. But the governor's office didn't like it. We wanted to regulate just market rate here because we know our own community. There are a lot of probably what I call merchant developers that haven't been interested in Morgan Hill because they don't want to go through the hassle of the RDCS. Whereas we've had other developer partners that have worked with us for years, and we've been partners together. So we're concerned that we now have to compete to try to get these great numbers that we've had and to perform. And, you know, they don't realize that that one shoe fits all approach is really, I think, going to be damaging to us. We got close, but we couldn't get them to do anything but agree that 1 year from now, they'll re-meet with us to see what the impacts have been.
I just said, but this is kind of like going to the nitty-gritty part of it, but can you compare the cost of remodeling to make affordable housing, like let's say for just single people? Because I'm looking at the people that are maybe coming back from college and they're still single. That's where I'm seeing that the population is going compared to new low-income housing developments. Like instead of building new on newly purchased land,
right?
Can you compare that to developing housing in like pre-existing buildings that are already there, but turning it into low-income housing?
So, you know, I think in general, the mechanics of that end up in a wash, being pretty close, because you still have to buy an improved property, not just the land, but you have to pay for the value of the improvements that are already on the property, and then you have to renovate it.
I'd like to see the numbers on that.
So, there aren't a lot of, there are some cities who are doing things with like old hotels. They're taking old hotels and they're remodeling them. They still end up running into $300,000 and $400,000 per unit. The other part of affordable housing, especially for really low-income folks, is sometimes those units need to have services with them. If they're for disabled, for example, they come with services. The cost of those long-term services get wrapped into the cost of the project and the operating cost of the project. And so it's not just construction and then you walk away. It's the management and all the other things that go along with it.
I can try to find some numbers for you on the project she's talking about in San Jose, but it's going to be different for every single project based on previous financing. But we can try to.
One of the things Morgan Hill's always done, and I've worked in a lot of other communities in California, the housing stock here is really well maintained by comparison, really well maintained. And so I can tell you the connection we have with our providers and the quality of the maintenance is really high here. And it's important for us.
Leslie, could you touch on a little bit on the effect of the new law on the granny units, what effect that's going to have on the community?
Well, I think this is one of those that eats at the single-family characteristics of neighborhoods. There are 3 or 4 accessory dwelling unit laws that were approved. First of all, we have to permit them over the counter, so we can't notice a neighbor. If your neighbor's going to build a granny unit, don't come yell at us because we didn't tell you that they're building a granny unit, because we can't. If you find out, that's fine. We can't put notices out and we can't have hearings about it. So we'll have to permit those over the counter. We get 60 days, and they can have a granny unit that is within 4 feet of your backyard, your side yard, etc. There are limits on how much parking we can require for them. You can have up to 2, 1,200 square foot, or we actually have a debate internally because there's 2 different laws. One says 1,000 square foot, the other says 1,200 square foot. We're trying to reconcile that. HCD by next summer will give us some rulemaking on it, but that's next summer. So we're trying to figure out what, you really can build. But I think the big thing is we have a lot of subdivisions that have maybe 20-foot setbacks in their rear yards. We can enforce those. HOAs cannot say that an ADU is not permitted. There was a separate law that was already signed earlier in July that says HOAs have no authority to not permit an ADU. They can still do design review, but they have to allow 16-foot at height and the 4-foot side yard and setback requirements. So they can still say, is it pink? Yep, it's pink. But that's about it. Perfect. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
So do you get to count that unit as one of your statistics?
We can count those units, but in Morgan Hill, because if you go on the process is with HCD that you, at the time you count those units, so if they were built this year, we would count them in this year's report to HCD in December. Rebecca needs to do a survey of what those units are renting for.
They are moderate.
And so we have to report them at moderates. We don't need moderates. We're at 400% of our moderates. They aren't affordables. They aren't necessarily low income. We can't require that they be income restricted. Law doesn't let us do that. We also can't require ownership on a lot that has ADUs any longer. Morgan Hill used to say one of those units has to have an owner living in it, and that's gone away. So essentially you can take your single family house, put 2 ADUs in the back, maybe make another junior ADU inside of your unit, and then move out and you're in a single family neighborhood setting. That's not the characteristics that Morgan Hill's had in the past. So we're just going to adapt for it.
Well, and what's interesting about that is there was a law, SB 50, it was Scott Wiener's law that he was moving through. It got held up and it'll be considered in the next legislative cycle. But one of his proposals about SB 50 was allowing all single family homes to be divided into 4 units. And Now, with the ADU laws, we've essentially done that. You can have 4 units essentially on one single family lot. So I don't know how that would come back in if he is successful. SB 330 took a lot out of his original law, so we don't know how that will blend in, but it is interesting that the ADUs did accomplish that goal without having his law go through.
Senator Wiener is the chair of the Senate Housing Committee, and so expect that we'll see another session heating up for additional. The other thing that's quite interesting also to me is that we expect that this is a 5-year suspension so that we can get units built. If they get built in this 5 years, hardly any of those get to go on our list as counting for anything, unless they're very low income, because we've already met. And I have a table of what we've done in terms of our performance I can hand out. Okay. So really, if people get into permitting, my guess is that maybe in the next 5 years, you'll see half of those units built. It takes a good couple of years for people, to get their construction permits and their financing and all that kind of stuff. By the way, it takes about 4 years for us to get an affordable housing project leveraged.
So, and the larger the project, the more complicated the sequel will be. So if you're doing an EIR, that's about a year. If you're doing the mitigated negative declaration, that's usually about 6 months. So you've got anywhere around that time that it will take before they can complete their entitlements and then start all the work to leverage the project. So we expect them all to come in early next year, but we don't expect anything to get started building for some time. I would like to push them out an extra year just so they're in the next cycle, but that's just me.
Back on the ADUs, can you enforce, construction quality standards on what that is? In other words, can somebody drag their 15-year-old trailer, stick it in the backyard, hook it up and call it an ADU? Or,
The building code does apply.
So the building codes still apply from that point of view?
Watch for that for next year.
This is being recorded, so.
What about the unincorporated areas? What kind of building requirements are county on?
Well, they'll have the same requirements wherever they permit units, but they aren't required to change their zoning. Not that I can see, not that I can read. There's nothing specific.
5-acre lots if they want to build.
If they want to put ADUs on their 5-acre lot, they can put wherever there's a single family home. They can still, I think, access those laws. But can they, do more than that? And are they required to change it from 5-acre zoning to 20 acres per unit? No. And both the Accountability Act and the SB 330 have specific provisions in them to protect agriculture. So floodplain are exemptions and agriculture are exemptions. Just like our city council will not be required to give up their discretionary authority to entertain somebody's request who wants to say, I want to take my industrial and make it residential. That's completely a discretionary decision. Nothing in SB 330 requires them to say, yep, you can do that. Where it's already zoned, you can't change the zoning.
The county is also working on an ordinance to allow by right farm worker housing for up to 6 units on ag land.
The caveat with anything that the county would want to do is it has to be able to be served by septic and well. And private water systems for multiple units are no longer allowed under state law. They're prohibited by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And so that is going to be really interesting for the county to see where they want to do, because they would have to connect in to a major utility in order to have any sort of smaller density projects.
Let's
Or larger
see,
density.
does the county has housing production requirements?
Yes.
Do they have to change their current zoning to meet to solve for the same issues that we're solving for?
Depending on what they get for their RENA number.
And they may get it through like Stanford, for example.
So yes, they're treated the same way,
Yeah.
but their numbers are usually much lower, but I don't know if they'll change and increase.
So the utility factor does come into play here. Let's say our number is way more than anyone ever envisioned in the world. More than 3,000. Let's say it's more than 3,000. And with the pacing, we may not have a utility capacity that is ready to go for all 3,000 units all at one time. Cities do have the ability to say, wait, our infrastructure is not there yet. But the new laws also provide HCD with a final approval over that. So cities can't just set moratoriums unless HCD agrees. So we would have to demonstrate that this is a problem. The county would be in that same boat.
So this all assumes that we're going to still have a market here as well. And so, I mean, all of this has to be tempered by the fact that, you know, there has to be a market. Morgan Hill has not even had a market for people looking at much higher density. I got here in 2011. At that time, we didn't have even hardly any townhomes because the banks and the lenders and the developers had a picture of Morgan Hill as being a single-family ownership community, and they didn't, you know, support that. So it's not just what the city wants to do, it's also what those other development influences and investors and all are going to do as well. So part of it is, as we've been talking for the last couple of years, and anytime we have a housing discussion, we're going to have to be flexible. We're going to have to see what we see and then try to figure out how we can move with it the best we can. Fine?
Leslie, let's say that a developer comes in and sees an acre of land someplace that they want to develop into affordable housing. And on that acre, they want to build 30 units. Are you required to raise the height restriction for that?
So you're required to entertain through density bonus for affordable housing exceptions to side yard setback, height, parking restrictions, all sorts of things. So can they ask for a height? Yes.
I think the question was more about density.
No, yes. Can you go up, right?
Yeah, I mean, can they force you to change your height restriction for that piece of property because they want to build it?
Not necessarily. I mean, it depends. It's a function of the design. But yes, part of the design could be that they go up versus out, you know, on that site. They don't have to meet your FAR, your floor area ratio numbers and things like that, which used to limit what you could build on sites any longer. And so we'll see projects that have less parking than have normally, you know, been done. And we'll see them that get closer to side yards and don't have same setbacks. And yeah, they can go higher if they want to put another level on there to meet that. They're entitled to up to 80% additional density.
And if they're within a quarter mile of a transit stop, they're entitled to additional 33 feet or 3 stories.
Well, we do have really good relationships with our affordable nonprofit developers, where they ask us, what type of project do you want to see? How many units? And we usually say 40-ish seems to be the sweet spot for the number of units in any one particular project.
And then let's go back.
I just wanted to say, those density numbers, we're talking about 80%, the 3 stories, that often kicks these projects into a different construction type that isn't financeable for their purposes. So I doubt here that we would actually see that type of boost.
So let's go back to Mark and talk about that real quickly on this particular issue, because there are some other things. For example, if you're close to transit for market projects too, there are some exclusions where you can't require parking. Is that going to happen in Morgan Hill? Probably not, because we're a softer market, and developers who are building here are building for a long period of time. And if the market softens here and people can get closer to their job when the market turns down, they're going to move to someplace else. If you don't have amenities here, they're going to go immediately. Parking is an amenity. For affordable, it's even a greater amenity, because oftentimes you've got people working more than one job, they're doing shift work, they don't want to come home and have to try to figure out where the heck they're going to put their car. So developers are, they're cognizant of that. Certainly our affordable developers are aware of that. They're going to make a project that people want to live in and stay in. So I think that, we'll have to wait and see. I don't see a lot of them coming here saying, oh, you're close to the Caltrain station, therefore I'm not going to do any parking there. Well, we don't really have a real, commuting transit system here. And VTA over the last few years has continued to disinvest on bus service. So I just don't see that happening.
So Yvonne, you had a question?
Yeah, on my street, there's a guy who has several illegal ADUs. And I know another place where there are garages converted into units. And I'm wondering if the city of Morgan Hill is going to try and identify all these illegal units and upgrade them.
So I think you've got two questions. One is, are we going to try and identify them? I'm not sure that we have any capacity to do that. We have one code enforcement officer for the entire city. He typically handles more than 250 cases a month, and we focus on health and safety issues first. So, hoarding or, structures that are illegal or bad wiring, things like that. Under the law, can people take their illegal units and come in and ask to make them legal? Yes. So under the new ADU, there's kind of an opportunity for them to make them legal if they want to. Garage conversions can also come in and legalize. It means they have to kind of pull their walls back out so we can see what the wiring looked like and whatnot. So they may have to take down their sheetrock and do those kinds of things if they want to make them legal. And really after that, we have to work hard with the real estate community to make sure that at the time of sale, illegal units are identified and either converted back or whatever. Do I see us going out and trying to identify them and work with them? No. Do I see us suggesting that now's the time to make them legal? Yeah.
And a lot of cities do it through what's called an amnesty program. They'll give you a discount on fees or inspection costs in order to make sure that those units follow health and safety codes. You get garage conversions where they keep half the garage, but there's still fumes coming into the unit. Those types of situations are even more important that we get people in to legalize, and then we get to count them too, which we always like to do.
So what I'm hearing is that there is a need for really low income housing. If there's people that own houses that are making their own low income housing on their property, that's what I'm hearing.
Well, but
And
they're
so
not,
I'm not-
they're not all acting that way. They may not be renting them as low income.
Right. Okay, so, but there is a need
For
very low income housing.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I'm thinking to myself, then maybe they should be built somewhere close to our community, so that the people have somewhere to live and work in the same town. So that's just one comment. But the question that I have was, do the senior housing developments produce revenue?
No. I mean, they produce enough revenue for the developer to operate them. If they're affordable, restricted units, if they've got permanent covenants and restrictions on them, it's not whether or not they're senior and or any other affordability. If they use tax credits or they're for folks 60% of the median or less, they generally get a welfare exemption and don't pay any property tax. So remember, Morgan Hill is 10% of the property tax. So we forego that, and then the school districts forego, and the county forgoes and whatnot, and that's part of the mix and the blend.
They primarily rebates developer fees when they first do the project, and then when they refinance and rehab 15 years later.
But they have a much older population now,
Not to the
and a bigger concentration of folks that are my age. We find one of our bigger problems is that the capacity of seniors who are even in like low-income units, restricted units, to even take that little gradual cost of living adjustment and to make it work on things like Social Security and nothing else, boy, they cannot do it. So we've run into a number of cases here locally where we've got maybe a woman whose husband died. Her Social Security gets massively adjusted once he's gone, and she now is living in her car because that's the only thing she can afford. And they've been middle income or above people living in our community forever, and now she and her cat are living in the car. So this is a really serious situation, especially for folks who have no other means of income. Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned, someone brought up the market and developers coming in and the whole thing. We've had the RDCS in place, and that got me thinking about with this new law and all these new requirements. Do you think there's a possibility that because of all these different things going on with the SB 330, that developers won't want to come in because of the difficulties, and we won't have a hard time meeting the new requirements for housing?
I don't think it's, I think I know that the lobbies for the Buildings and Trades Association are right there. They're right on SB 330 as being major supporters. I'm aware of many situations where builders call HCD, say, this city's giving me a hard time, maybe you should come in and give them a counseling letter because my project's not moving fast enough.
Sorry, another question. I know I should know the answer to this, but when somebody asks about density bonuses, and developers have the ability to go up, or go high, go denser, do without parking, clarify again if that is for affordable housing projects, and if the city has the ability to require an affordability level to meet what we need to meet.
They actually can only ask for certain concessions if they have certain affordability levels in their project.
It's a sliding scale. So the more affordable it is, the more stuff you get.
Any other questions? Stuff, we get more stuff.
More stuff.
I have a concern because when we moved here, before Measure E was voted on, and the housing was going crazy, and people were borrowing contractors' license numbers to build homes. And so consequently, a lot of those homes, especially up on the hill, were not constructed to any kind of real good standard. It concerns me, although you assuaged some of my concern by the fact that it's going to be slower than we think. They're not going to all build 3,000 units in 60 days.
That's my guess, by the way.
Well, I like your guess, so.
6 months from now, you can go, oh, you're a liar.
So, I need some assurance that the permitting process is going to be able to remain strong in light of what the SB 330 is making demands for.
So the permitting process here will remain strong. We're looking at bringing on some additional plan check help. It's a cost. We're going to have to charge it out in fees. But we have an obligation to the state of California as a subdivision of the state to make sure that we permit according to our state codes. And so we always make sure that contractors are properly licensed, their licenses are active when they pull permits and things like that. I don't have as much fear about that. Now, catching people who are on the job that don't have a license is another issue, but so far, our inspections have been able to return to, same day or next day inspections requests by and large for residential.
We have a stellar building team, and they are out in the field. Even our building official likes to be out in the field and checking on permits. They shut down development all the time when something's off. I get red tag emails every day. So they are on top of things, and I don't see that changing in any way, shape, or form.
But even with this, Leslie talked about some builder getting on the phone to the state agency and saying,
oh, that's really over the planning process. It's not over.
Right. It won't be over the building.
So there won't be a fine levied on the city of Morgan building because they've slowed down the project due to
SB 330 is about the entitlement. So once they have permission to move forward through construction, we're good to go. We obviously can't say, oh no, we're not doing inspections for a month. We're not going to get there. But the cities that are getting these counseling letters have changed zoning. They've disallowed housing in certain parts of their city through general plan amendments. In the case of Cupertino, they're challenging a development that could go by right. And so they're the ones that get those types of letters.
But not, building permits are a health and safety issue. And so that's kind of where the distinction is, it's the approval process versus the construction permits, which have to be done to state standards. We did, when we came out of the recession, and we had a backlog of folks who had not built because the economy was so bad. We did have a lot of houses all going up at the same time. Now our inspections went to 3 days, 4 days, really unusual for us, but that kind of backlog we'll just have to deal with. What we're afraid of is that because every city may see a lot of renewed interest with some of the laws, that if we need extra help, we may not be able to find extra help. Like if we need extra building inspectors, sometimes they're pretty tough. Government work in this kind of arena is not something that's appealing to a lot of people anymore. It's not a great gig. So it's harder and harder to find people who want to do this.
And we're seeing new consulting firms starting every day for folks that will provide those type of services, from planning to building to our land development engineering groups.
Okay, Leslie, what's the impact if we don't comply? What's the fiscal impact to the city?
So the fiscal impact, for example, if we deny a project that meets the general plan, and the language in SB 330 is not even your zoning anymore. If the city's zoning doesn't really look like its general plan, they have the right to build to the general plan, because it's been viewed as if the city's changed the zoning to make it harder for them to build to the general plan. So those things go away. So if you deny a project, let's say we have a project in front of us and we say, you just need to reduce the density on that project because it looks way too dense and there's no space and you should have more parks and whatnot. If we did something like that and we denied a project on that basis, the state would say, sorry, you can't do that any longer. That's subjective, not objective. It lowered the density that the general plan said you could have. So you, city, we're calling you to give you a counseling, you need to approve that project. And if we say, no, it's a terrible project for our community, they will most likely have their legal counsel compel us to do that. So this happened in Los Gatos with North 40, where they turned down the project, said, even though it meets the specific plan, we don't like the project, it doesn't feel like Los Gatos. Developer sued, the court said, sorry, Los Gatos, it meets your specific plan, you have to allow it to go forward. If you don't, or actually, if you're a real bad player and you say all sorts of horrible things in the public record about why you're not approving it, you can be fined up to $10,000 a unit. And it's got to come out of your general plan, or general fund. It can't come out of your housing funds or anything else. You gotta pay it where it hurts. So you gotta go to your fund balance. If you say, forget it, we're not doing it because it's bad for our community, that number can be 5 times. So figure that 100-unit project, 5 times, it's fucking $5 million.
And you have to pay for all the attorney fees.
Yes. And they,
How long does that process take?
it can be very short on the Los Gatos. It was a matter of maybe 90 days. Yeah, so they were compelled, and had they not gone forward and issued the permits, they could have been fined on their project, for example. So that's the big stick that they have out there to force cities to comply. We'll see.
So could it be that even if in good faith, we try to work with a developer and the developer says, I don't want to do this, right? If I don't want to do this particular thing, I need this amount of money, so I threaten to sue Morgan Hill. Does Morgan Hill have no choice? Are we always compelled to just...
Yeah, no, if it meets the general plan and the density of the general plan, unless we can find something that is a health and safety, a direct health and safety reason why it shouldn't be approved, we're going to have to approve it. So developers. That's why we have to be very careful about making sure our objective criteria, how high, articulation on sides of buildings, all of that is written so that people have to still try to build the same kind of quality. But we also are limited in the amount of public meetings we can have. That's a public meeting and a hearing. So we're permitted 5 total for any project of any size, and at the end, you're done. And you can't continue a hearing unless it counts for another meeting. Now, some of those things are quasi-judicial, or you have to take in front of a planning commission or city council, like a tentative map if it's a subdivision, a final map. There's 2 hearings right there. Does it give any time to neighbors and anybody else to come in and give comment? And then if a neighbor comes in and gives comment and says, I don't want any of that next to my side yard, can we even do it without losing a unit? That's what's going to be really hard, is that we've had lots of flexibility in the past. If you don't have a developer who's willing to do that with you, they can say, no, I'm not doing that.
Well, I just wanted to add on the number of meetings. The city of Morgan Hill is really lucky in a way that we just have our planning commission. Cities that have multiple commissions, like a design review board, a historic commission, they are panicking because their 5 meetings will go like that. And so they need to be able to have 2 hearings at council if necessary. Planning commission needs to be able to continue an item if they need more discussion. All of those different factors are weighing in on that as well.
Sally, had a question?
I'm wondering if your department is doing any outreach for developers that are very experienced in this type of building.
So we have a lot of developers who are really experienced that are working in town. We have not done any outreach to developers. I think our feeling is our plate is so full right now, just trying to get prepared for what we don't know is coming.
Do you mean affordable housing development? Yes, we are in conversations with a couple different of our partners and sites.
I thought you just meant developers in
We're
general.
having conversations with local developers about this as well. We haven't done any formal outreach meetings or anything like that, but everyone is well aware of it, and we're talking them through.
Yeah, we're really pretty confident about our affordable developers, because we all have to partner to cobble together multiple sources of financing and whatnot. And so our relationships are about making these quality projects that we can keep and that will last forever. And so, like we've done 4 affordable projects in the last 2 years here. All of them beautiful inside, real nice quality. I think that, we expect the same experience with our nonprofit affordables.
We're also strategic about setting aside units for individuals that are homeless in South County, so we try to work on that as well.
I was going to say, just kind of thinking about the time, I think this has been a really robust conversation, and just to kind of help us focus on any other things that we want to get out of today's session, and I'll give you the mic for you to ask the question. I think about, one, there's a lot of things coming to us, City Hall. There is a lot of conversation with the community as to what does this mean, and how does this housing legislation is going to impact the effort at hand, which is maintain long-term fiscal sustainability. How do we as a community remain sustainable, dealing with the fact that we're getting all this housing that at the end, in the long run, costs the city more money. On a self-serving sort of point of view, it makes me think about jobs. How do we continue to fight for economic development so we can have jobs for our local residents here, and what is the task at hand? So I just wanted to put it into context, given the timing, given that we are kind of closing our hour with you, already going to noon. And if there's anything, Maureen or the team, that we want to highlight, any major key takeaways, Chris or Michelle, that we have not mentioned vis-a-vis the Engage Morgan Hill effort.
Yeah, on
I
that
know
note.
she had a question,
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
but since you just jumped in.
Let her go first. It's fine. Back and forth. Getting your exercise.
And having been in planning process for a number of years, I'm fully cognizant of what it costs. to do a development, the numbers of hours. I mean, we spent 40 hours just on lighting for the Target store, okay, in the planning process. So if now you have 60 days, 5 meetings, what impact is that going to have on staff? What's the cost impact, the cost increase that we're going to see? Because that's relevant to this process of where we're moving with that.
So, you know, in the last economic downturn, planning switched to kind of a different model. We laid off redevelopment people, we laid off 11 people. And we have maintained a core, and the concept is to maintain a core of city staff and then to contract for other services along the way. Like all of our environmental services, our environmental review services are done by contract. We have additional support for engineering, land development engineering, outside review, floodplain analysis, you know, things that are real specialties and whatnot. So we keep our core, and the idea is that we supplement with folks that if we don't then have this big volume of activity, we can stop those contracts and we're not laying off more people. And so I think what we'll do is, you know, it makes sense to try to continue around that model as the field has weakened and there's all sorts of other rules that constrain us. Like you can't hire back for more than a certain number of hours, retirees out of the system because they want those jobs being created for new employees, or, you know, lots of state rules. So we're limited in the kind of resources and the talent we can go after is kind of my point.
I don't think we know yet, too.
Yeah, we don't. So we'll just have to deal with it as we get moving forward. Right now, are we thinking about expanding our existing core? We're not. We're thinking of limiting our access to the core and limiting our hours so that we can meet the timelines, and then just seeing what we see. And then we'll figure it out along the way.
And we're also working with Planning Commission very closely to make sure that they understand, at least for housing, they can't spend 40 hours on lighting. I mean, we're just going to have to be realistic about that. And hopefully,
there's going to be a whole lot of projects that don't even go to Planning Commission.
Hopefully through our objective standards, we're creating something, and this isn't, the objective standards that we're creating for January aren't the final point. We're able to continue to refine those over time, so long as they stay objective, which is a yes or no. Does this meet this? Yes, you're good to go. So that, I think, it's going to be a rough few. I think the first quarter is going to be really hard for everybody as we're just getting used to this, and we're going to see case law from other cities. We're going to see things get refined as the law continues to get implemented, but I think everyone's ready. We just aren't sure what's going to be coming at us yet.
And commercial projects and industrial projects
That's all
are not,
they're
they're excluded, right?
This gentleman is patiently waiting, so.
That's a good discussion. I think it'd actually be helpful for everyone to publish like service level agreements or SLAs that you expect for these services, so we all know, like, hey, you know, expect this one-day turnaround to become 5 day. And that was actually the broader question I was going to ask, which is we've been doing all these reviews of, you know, the future plans for transportation and road repair and safety and all these things. And it wasn't clear to me if those all, I think they were all pre-SB 330 in terms of what we expect the impact to be, what we expected the deficit, the budget to be. And it reminds me of, I really like the Caltrain plan that they published recently, where they kind of have projections through 2040 of like low, medium, high with their business plan. Yeah. Have we as a city started to look at the low, medium, high SB 330 impact on, like, for this sales tax or the revenue measures? Are these all presuming pre-SB 330 like dollar amounts when we talk about sales tax, et cetera?
You know, we haven't started to do anything other than just speculate about some of that. Finance and the capital improvements team have started to drill down. We're just starting our budget process. Will the planning and engineering team spend a lot of time on that right now? Probably not, because we can barely tie our shoes on some of the other stuff. I mean, if the legislation had been more clear and we're not trying to figure out what we're doing along the way as much, it would help, but I don't see us spending a lot of time except for that budget process trying to figure out what we don't know, and then hoping that the experience that we expect is going to match. But if the experience doesn't match, then we have to kind of adjust. So government doesn't normally say, let's be flexible, but we've been talking a lot about, we need to have some flexibility and realize we'll try our best to project. But boy, the minute we start to see something that feels completely different than that, we're gonna have to stop and correct course.
If I can jump in on that too. I don't think you were at the last presentation, but Chris Pioni did kind of touch on that, projecting in relation to some of the things we've been able to get from developer fees and so forth, and how that impacts, go ahead.
Yeah, and just like we've talked about with the RDCS fees and the projection of those, we've started doing that. We have not projected like the impact fee increases, so as Leslie talked about, right? So if we get this rush of housing units, we're going to collect more impact fees from that, but can we use that, there was a question earlier, to build that infrastructure to match that, sorry. But we are looking at that, and our master plans for our infrastructure, it's important to know, they aren't completely based on that population growth. We build the master plans for our infrastructure based on all the developable land in the general plan. So we know the infrastructure that needs to go in, and if the impact fees are set right, we will have enough money to build those. To Leslie's point, can we keep up, and are we doing it in the right place? That's what we have to do, but our plans are set to be ready for that. So we should be able to build the infrastructure, but the pacing of it, and there's many other issues related to that we have to figure out, but we are trying to stay ahead of that as much as we can.
We've been really accustomed to knowing that people come through RDCS a couple of years before they really start processing the rest of their project. So we knew what was coming looking forward and what year it was going to come forward. So predictability for us has been terrific. And that's one of the things we're going to have to adjust to.
What changes have to occur on the planning commission to get through all the extra volume of work?
So there will be, I think the big changes for the planning commission is that they're going to be limited in what they can actually give, what they can actually do. So they will be limited to that same streamlined checklist. If a project does go to them for review, let's say for the map, they're going to want to see, the rest of the project, and they're going to be limited in what they can say. If it's not an objective standard, they can't say, gee, I hate that color.
I mean, like, just.
They can say it, but if the developer says, I'm not going to change it,
I mean,
they're
is there
stuck.
a need for the planning commission to be larger?
No.
No, actually, 7, there's a lot of different perspectives, but 7 is actually ideal in my opinion. Because 7 always enables you to have a quorum. When you
The
get,
planning meeting, maybe I should go.
Yeah, maybe you should.
It's not just quorum.
There's plenty of seats available.
right, so right, but if you only have 5 and 2 people or maybe 3 people are gone for some reason, you can't have a meeting. When you have 7, it makes it a little more flexible. The thing I think the commission's going to have the toughest time with is staff having to tell them, you have to make a decision today. You don't get to continue this, we can't keep the conversation, we can't have a workshop on the timeline, and we're going to have to change our staff reports to incorporate the timeline. I've done that before with the Permit Streamlining Act, but this will be the SB 330 timeline, so they know where they are. And that's going to be tough for them. They like to spend time, really detailed time on projects.
And I just want to make sure that you understand it's not a disrespectful reaction to no, but the more people you put on a commission, the more people need to give their input, and the more time it takes. And so we think about, a lot of our meetings now go until 11 or 12. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of, volunteer time are given by planning commissioners. And with our RDCS program, these folks have given hundreds and hundreds of hours. I've never seen them work so hard. So the idea of having even more and managing even more time really is hard.
And the only places you tend to see commissions bigger than 7 for local municipalities or cities that are in the millions, like San Jose, San Francisco, Seattle, those types of cities have commissions that may be 10 to 15 people, but it's a very different environment than a local municipality.
No more questions? Well,
Thank
Thank you, Leslie, Rebecca, and Jennifer. I think that was an excellent conversation. Obviously, it's complex. We could probably stay here for 8 hours and keep digging in and talking questions. So thank you to our wonderful team because they are our experts. And I think they did a good job of sharing information and answering your questions. So it is 11:30. We didn't actually need to go to 12. A couple of things, we do need to decide upon a December meeting. I think maybe a better way to do it than trying to discuss it right now is I'll send up a doodle poll or something to get preferences. There is not a formal agenda at this moment for December. It'll be an opportunity to say, okay, now we've gone through all the information. Are there holes? Here's what the upcoming budget process looks like and how can we get this group participating in that. We're looking at potentially a tool to help both you and the community in better understanding the nitty-gritty of the budget and when you make shifts here, what happens there. And also some of the things that have been brought up about how do we get this out into the community in a meaningful way in different communication channels that are going to be more accessible and easy to understand. So I will send out an email with a little questionnaire or doodle poll type of thing to decide when we will meet in December, and I will do that very quickly so that people can get that on their books. December is usually a busy month for people. Are there any other just general questions before we, oh, there are. Okay, Brian.
Well, I want to know, could I say something on a different subject?
No.
Thank you, Chris. I belong to a number of different organizations, and shortly after the Gilroy incident, somebody asked me if, we could put together a gun buyback program. So I went to our chief of police, Dave Swing, and over the past 6 weeks, he's gotten together, and a group of us have gotten together with the DA's office and the Gilroy police to put together a gun buyback program. It's going to be held on December 14th at the Corporation Yard in Gilroy, which is a secure location. And the DA's office has run these before in the San Jose area, and they normally like to raise $50,000 in order to make it successful. So what we've done thus far, which is great, is the DA's office has contributed $25,000. The city of Gilroy has contributed $12,500. The city of Snowmobile Hill has contributed $5,000. Another organization that's part of the Gilroy and DA's office has contributed another $5,000. I've gone to a couple organizations in town. Rotary has contributed $1,000. The South County Democratic Club has contributed $500. One individual has contributed $100 so far. So we're about at the $50,000 level. We decided a couple meetings ago that $50,000 is great, but if we have a little extra, it would take care of the issue if somebody brought in a weapon to turn in, that we already gave the $50,000 to other people and we'd have to turn them away. So we decided to raise it to $70,000. And we ask no questions of the person that brings the weapon in. Don't take any identification or anything, turn it in, make sure it's operational, and then of course those weapons get destroyed. So what we're doing is, this group is a very good group because we're engaged and we know a lot of people and we get out to a lot of people. So we're going to have some literature in about 3 weeks that we'll be able to get out to you and to other people to try and raise a few more dollars. What happens with those money, the police, by the way, or the DA's office doesn't control the money. It has to be another organization. So CLEF, Community Law Enforcement Foundation, which I'm a board member of in Morgan Hill, we decided that we would be the fiduciary. We've set up a separate bank account that CLEF already had, and we set up another one with Pinnacle Bank. Sorry, Jeff. That we're going to put the money in, and it's going to be South County Gun Buyback Program Fund. Any monies left over will be left in that fund for another buyback program in 3 or 5 years. By the way, does anybody know, I know John and Steve do already probably, the last time we had a gun buyback program in South County? Any idea? 1994, 25 years ago. So we believe it's a good thing to do. no matter if you're a Second Amendment right person or not, doesn't matter, because this doesn't affect that at all. It's for people who want to get rid of weapons that they may have had from their uncle or grandfather or whatever, and they don't shoot, they don't go hunting, and they just have it in the house. So I'd appreciate anybody's help in reaching out to organizations once they get you the literature and see what we can do. Yes, any questions? Nick?
Yeah, I'm wondering, along with the brochure, can you provide, and I sent on the board the Morgan Hill Community Foundation, can you provide some facts behind that of who's already donated? I'll bring it to their.
Yes,
in November as well.
we will have that. We already have a kind of brochure listed, the main people that have donated. Rotary's on the list, the South County Democratic Club and the other people. So yes, we want to give knowledge to the people that do donate and, thank them effusively. We will do that quite often because we think it's a good thing to do.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, were there other questions? I think.
I had a thought while we were doing this. Okay, when we did the downtown plan, 5, 8, and then the one we actually worked with, we used a storefront downtown that was not occupied, okay? Maybe we can't do that this time at the same level, because there was a lot of professional help. I think there was a consultant involved and whatnot. What if we had posters of some kind that could go in one or the other of those two new reorganized storefronts, and then maybe some of the other places downtown, restaurants, for example. I'm pretty sure that was a good, ask my granddaughter because she works there. So that kind of thing, if we can come up with just an informational bullet point type thing that's colorful, it grabs attention, people when they're waiting in line or they're walking up and down the street could take a look at it, and maybe that's one way. I don't know, I'm not a techie, so I don't know what podcasts doing and whether or not they could have a machine running with that, but because that's what we did before. But bottom line is that a potential?
Yes, yes. I think there's all kinds of creative things like that hopefully we can really start focus on. We've already got a lot of good information and stuff, and it's just packaging it in a way that will make sense. So, yes.
Just a quick question, because we're about the outreach. Is there a way that we can translate this in a couple of languages? Either this PowerPoint or just something informational for community that's not here?
So I will look into that. As you may or may not know, translation can be extremely costly. And in order for a lot of this to make sense, you do need the supporting documents to be translated as well. Some of it, so what I'll say is, any of you who are native speakers of a different language know that Google Translate is not a very good translation most of the time. However, it again is kind of the standard. So if we wanted to Google Translate everything, that is one possibility. I'm not sure that accomplishes the goal though. To translate everything that we have done so that it's more accessible for Spanish speakers or monolingual folks, we definitely can look into. We've looked at doing that in other things, and the cost is just simply prohibitive. So I guess the other thought would be is if we've got any native speakers who are interested in helping to translate, there's still a quality control thing. We certainly have native speakers, like for Spanish, who are city employees. It doesn't mean that they are skilled translators. But yeah, we're trying to look at those things. It's always that cost benefit.
I'm just wondering on the videos that we all get to view if we want to, is that for public consumption already?
Absolutely, they're on YouTube. These are YouTube.
So
You can share them with whoever you want,
But I
and
mean-
people can find them.
for the Engage Morgan Hill or Morgan Hill 411, is it put on, a link put on there for people to click onto okay.
Yes, it is. Yes, and they're out on, yeah, anyone can find them if they really want to, and we're pushing that information as well.
You know, it's really challenging trying to figure out how to get the word out, but even more than that. We have a lot of information and it really needs to be condensed into small bullet points because people do not, they're inundated with information. And I think that's something that we should think about doing now. Because it's going to take a long time to do.
Yep, sound bites is what we need as we go forward. But you've got probably, at least from a financial perspective, one of the biggest topics is next time public safety. That takes up almost 80% of our general fund in terms of supporting it. So that is a really key component of anything we share. And so that's next time.
But I think we have enough information that we've received where we can start. We have enough information that we've received where we need to start thinking about how to condense it.
And I would welcome your support, Yvonne, and anyone else who wants to start turning it into sound bites.
And I would definitely love to help with the translation. Oh, I don't.
Look, we're recording. That's why we want the microphone, is because when people watch these on YouTube, if we haven't used the microphone, it's very difficult for them to really understand. So that's really the reason.
Oh, I just sit here and I volunteer at the Friends of the Morning Hill Library. I just love it. I don't even think I don't pay for it, and it's just wonderful. But with that said, Spanish is my native language, and just hearing this, I thought, geez, I'd love to have, apart from the art, the contributions, and I mean, that would be an amazing experience. Teaching Spanish also has really let me to see how much I love my language, and so it would be great to be part of that if you want.
Thank you so much, appreciate that. Okay, we're hoping that a majority of you can attend the city council meeting on November 6th. Council meetings are always held in this room, and they start at 7 o'clock. I don't know at this point where this agenda item will be. Hopefully we'll have some influence on the polling data being early in the agenda. But we'll share that information with you as soon as we do. I have 3 people who want to actually be part of a formal presentation. And then our next Saturday meeting is November 23rd. That's public safety, 9 o'clock, this room. That will also be another detailed presentation. So thank you all for your commitment, dedication, and effort. It's so very much appreciated. Have a great weekend. I hope that most of you have power come this evening. And be prepared.
You good?
A little late. Yeah, of course. Oh, where are you from?